Hello and welcome to today's webinar, where we're going to look at the results of a recent survey that we held on how the pandemic might have impacted employee expectations of work going forward. Firstly, just a quick introduction. My name's Chris Goulding. I'm the Managing Director of Wade McDonald. I'm now up to 21 years, sadly, into my recruitment career. Spent the first 18 years with a corporate recruiter, mainly focusing on finance recruitment, covering quite large geographies. Then was approached by Wade McDonald 3 years ago to come in as Managing Director. We specialise in finance, data science and HR staff. We've been running for 30 years now. And work with organisations really from the FTSE Top 100 right the way through to SME across all of the different sectors, public and private. So why did we carry out this survey? It's pretty obvious that the coronavirus has caused some major changes in the way that businesses have had to interact with their employees and the way that work has been done. As the pandemic's gone on, we've actually carried out 3 different surveys. So back in April, we did an economic report trying to focus in on business leaders, working out how they felt their companies were likely to fare as we move forward. We then looked into staff welfare back in June and surveyed more, I guess, line manager level, along with some business leaders to see how they felt they were interacting with their staff during the pandemic, how they changed things and how they felt they'd supported their welfare overall during what was obviously a very tricky time. And then in July, we thought, actually, let's try and look at the people that are working for those businesses and try and work out how they feel that things have changed for them and obviously how they feel things will change moving forwards. So we looked into 3 distinct areas when we were doing this. The first one was how people had continued to work, if indeed they had to continue to work, and where that was and how it had gone. We then looked into how they felt they'd been treated by their businesses to see if it worked the same as businesses felt that they treated them. And then finally, how their expectations of the workplace will have changed due to the pandemic, how they felt things should be moving forward for them, and also looked into the types of benefits businesses offer and whether the pandemic will have changed what they felt was important to them moving forwards. So first of all, some stats. We had 415 responses to the survey, so a decent response. Of those, 14.5% had sadly been made redundant. Now, that figure to me seemed high to start off with, because I don't think it will match national statistics. But then I think if we think about it in a bit more detail, if you've been made redundant, you're likely to go and talk to a recruitment consultancy. Obviously, this went out via our database as well as LinkedIn and other methods, but the majority of respondents came from the actual database, and therefore it was likely that more would have been made redundant. 14.5% were furloughed. That's low compared with national statistics, where I think we're looking at 9.6 million, which would be about 25% of people that have been made furloughed at some point during the pandemic. However, again, a large proportion of those that have been made furlough would maybe have worked in different roles, hospitality, etc., and that's not our core market. As this was aimed at finance, HR and data professionals, 14.5% probably sounds about right. 66%, so 2/3 of people started working from home, and then perhaps surprisingly 4.3% actually carried on working as normal, going into offices, etc., which we might not have expected to see. So then we looked into whether people had dedicated workspace. There were 276 respondents that worked from home, and a large percentage of these said that they did have dedicated workspace when we consider that they were kind of dumped into working from home with no notice. So 72.6% of people said that they were lucky enough to have a dedicated workspace. However, if we look into that a little bit deeper, we could question whether the dedicated workspace was perhaps an ideal workspace. When we consider an awful lot of people probably ended up working in kitchens, spare bedrooms, dining rooms, etc. An awful lot of them wouldn't have had a proper work desk or work chair, and we'll look into whether that affected them as we go through this. If I look at my own staff, we obviously have people working for us that are probably a younger generation to me, some of which will still live at home with their parents. They would have been fighting for workspace with their parents, who were also unexpectedly having to work from home. And I think it's fair to say that a number of those people actually ended up working in their bedrooms, maybe sat on their bed with a laptop, which is obviously not an ideal place to be. And I think you'll find that of that 27.4% of people, an awful lot will have had to replicate that or keep moving around the house as they fight it for space with family or housemates. So then we looked at rigid routines. 3/4 of people said that they had a very rigid routine still, with 1/4 of people stating that they didn't. We tried to look at the reasons why there may not have been a rigid routine, and indeed if this was actually a bad or good thing. There were things like homeschooling interruptions. I know I had some of those, which made it difficult at times. Childcare issues for people with smaller children, so grandparents might have been the people that looked after them before, or nurseries, and obviously these places were shut. Sharing workspace made it difficult, again with their rigid routine as well as on the previous slide. Some people found it hard to motivate themselves to work like normal. I know, for instance, in an industry like our own, where an awful lot of what we do is actually outbound, that would definitely have been an issue for some of my staff in finding the motivation without people sat around them to actually push themselves out there to make calls, etc. At times. Of those perhaps more positive reasons for not having a rigid routine, an awful lot of people that we work with would work in areas like finance, HR, etc., as we said before, and actually they probably became more task and deadline orientated rather than thinking they had to stick to that rigid 9 till 5. And again, as a working practice moving forward, you could argue that that would be quite a positive thing. The work was still getting done, but does it really matter, unless they've got meetings, etc., whether they're sat at a desk from 9 till 5? Potentially not. Okay, then we looked at whether people found it easier or harder to work from home. And actually 45% found it harder, which may again become a little bit of a surprise when you look at some of the conclusions that come out at the end. 24% found no difference and 31% actually found it easier. I think we'll look at reasons for more difficulty on the next slide, but a major thing to consider when you're looking at those stats, because 45% is very high, is that again people were thrown into working from home without much notice, and therefore there would have been some issues which perhaps wouldn't exist if you were actually doing it on an ongoing basis, or partially work from home, partially from an office. So these were the issues that people found working from home. Again, there was definitely some stuff around childcare issues and looking after their children. Noisy neighbours. My neighbours are wonderful people, in case any of you happen to watch this. But next door did start having a loft conversion at one point, so for about 8 weeks before I managed to get back to an office, it was a little bit noisier than it had been before, which again can be a little bit difficult. Sharing workspace, again, we've talked about. My partner was working for part of lockdown and was trying to do things in a quiet environment, whereas I was trying to speak to people on the phone to see how I could help or talk to them about the market. Luckily, as it was summer, that meant that I could spend time walking around the garden. Definitely wore the grass down there, but definitely not an ideal situation, which some people would have found. Back pain caused by inappropriate desk setup. We've looked at that. If you're working from a kitchen table, if you haven't got a proper chair, if you haven't been lucky enough to have an office, there definitely would be issues that arise from that. Mental health issues, clearly, and again, we'll look at this in a bit more detail in a moment, but mental health became a bigger problem for many people during the pandemic for a whole host of reasons, and that would have been an issue. And we've talked about lack of motivation. The other things to remember, as everyone tried to start working from home, Wi-Fi issues, with my lot, again, unfortunately, we don't have a laptop for every single member of staff, so it was kind of trying to cobble together the equipment to work from home, telephones, etc. So all of these things could have been an issue working from home, and these might not all be issues on an ongoing basis if we hadn't had to do it without so little planning in the first place. Okay, so then we looked into just a simple question of why people might have missed the office, and the main reason comes down to people. So the majority of people who missed the office were missing their colleagues, missing the day-to-day interaction. Some of it will have been missing leaving the house, obviously, but that was a little bit difficult to deal with. But you know, the chance to brainstorm with people, the chance to share ideas at the moment that the problem comes up. But a lot of our friendship groups do come from work, so people found that very difficult. And you know, humans have an innate need to be with other humans, so probably not surprising, but that seemed to be the biggest thing that was highlighted about missing an office. So then we looked at planned returns to work, and this again shows how things moved so quickly throughout the pandemic. So in June, when we had surveyed our business leaders, line managers, only 32% had actually got strong plans on when to return to work. By July, we can see that was up to 80% of people, which might not mean they were going back straight away, but they at least knew when they were going to. 20% of people weren't looking to go back to work at that point still. However, and we'll see whether Boris's announcements this week have made much detail to that. I know I've spoken to a few clients in the day or two after his announcements who were planning to go back in October, and at this point they don't have any plans at all to return before 2021, and they're not quite sure it'll be January. So, you know, as he's saying, 6 months worth of support is back out there. Who knows what will happen with this going forward. But again, this I think shows, as I said a minute ago, how things have changed so rapidly throughout the pandemic. This is when they would have looked to go back, and actually in the second week of September we noticed that there were far more people back in offices than had been previously when we're speaking to candidates and clients. Also noticed that we were getting stuck in a mini rush hour, but it was a mini one in comparison with the old one. But as you can see, most people at the point that we had held this survey would have expected to be back in an office before probably the end of October, with a small proportion, or maybe not small, fifth of people looking at 2021. As I say, we probably need to resurvey to find out how that's been affected by any of the announcements that have made this week and by anything that happens in the coming weeks. Okay, so this was something that did surprise me, and this is where we move on to the section where we're looking at what people want from work going forwards. Only 10% of people that we surveyed, so only 40 people out of 400 odd, actually wanted to work more time in an office than they did from home. And it might be that I'm being naive, but that slightly surprised me, especially when we consider people say they miss people so much, and also the fact that they were finding work harder to do from home than they said they would do in an office to start off with. Really high proportion of people, 33% that want to do only 1 day in an office, another 33% that want to do 2 days in an office, and then we can see a 50-50 split, and then the other things going down there. We can only make the assumption that people believe that it was harder to work at home during the pandemic because of all of the other issues that went along with it, such as your homeschooling, Wi-Fi, not having the proper space, etc. I also suspect, and this comes from other conversations, that if people are going to start working from home more, they will expect their businesses to actually pay to set them up from home. So maybe towards their Wi-Fi costs, but definitely with proper desks, proper chairs, proper laptops, phone equipment, all of those things, the infrastructure that goes around it. So it'll be interesting to see how business reacts to that moving forwards. I guess that the flip side of that coin for businesses, if they're in a position where they can reduce their the size of the office they have or get rid of it altogether, then paying £250, £500 per person to get them set up from home might be a small cost to bear when you think about the savings they've got. But what we will undoubtedly see when we start coming out of the pandemic properly is that work patterns, I think, will change, and where people do them, we've just got to wait to see how much business embraces what it looks like people actually want. Okay, then we went and looked at mental health. Looks like stress rose, according to HR News, in a report that I'd read just before we put this out, from 17% from 5%, which is huge. And there were nearly 30% of respondents saying that they were suffering from mental health issues whilst they were at home. Some of this will have been caused by work or non-work. Remember, a lot of people were furloughed or redundant, which can be very, very stressful. But there was also a lot else going on in the world. So I don't think we can put it all down to the stress of work, but it is obviously quite a scary statistic to see that over 25% of people, over a quarter of people, were suffering from mental health issues during those months. And I think this is why we can only hope that we're not all locked down again in the winter months, because if it's going to be dark after 4 o'clock and before 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning, that is not going to be a fun time for people to get out and do things which can relieve some of the stress that has been added to them during this period of time. Okay, so I think this was a positive. We can see that employers did support their staff. They felt like they did, and this is backed up by people that have obviously taken our survey. We can see that over 40% of people think they were supported exceptionally well during the period, with another 35+ % saying that they were supported exceptionally well. 17% said that they felt that their organisations could have done better, and then a very small majority felt that they were not supported particularly well. When we looked into this a bit more deeply, things that employers felt that they had been given which were very helpful were things like employee assistant plans, online platforms with self-help material, access to private doctors, coaching, counselling. We saw online training being offered a lot, even to staff that were furloughed, which gave people the opportunity to upskill. So all of those things were very, very positive. The negatives, really, when we looked into it more deeply, were just communication. We tried to speak to all of our furloughed staff on a very regular basis. We had pub quizzes on Zoom, but we also tried to talk to them honestly about where the business was, how we were performing without them, when we were trying to get them back, how we were looking at it. And I like to think our staff will feel that they were well communicated with, and this has helped when they've come back. I think those that have felt they weren't treated as well, didn't get a level of communication where they knew really what was going on, had no foresight as to when they were going back, were worried about how their businesses were performing, maybe were just left to it working from home without too much communication from line managers. So I think most of that comes down to communication, although obviously it was very good to see how many people got EAP plans out and running so quickly. Okay, again, this slide could look negative. This is how people feel their businesses will fare going forwards, and we can see that 36% think their business positions will have worsened due to the pandemic. The reason I say there's some positivity in here is in April, business leaders, there were actually 90% of them had come back on our survey that thought their businesses were going to suffer really negatively, and there are actually quite a number of those that were scared that businesses would go under. So if it's a third by now, obviously that's still to some extent an absolute disaster, but it's not as big a disaster as it could have been. The other positive there, over 25% said that their businesses had actually improved. When we look into that, unsurprisingly, pharmaceutical, logistics, freight, telecommunications, technology, healthcare businesses, people in those sectors will have found their businesses actually improved in some aspects. And then just over a third said unchanged. So as I say, it might look scary at first when you first look at it, but compared with April, I think that's more positive than people felt, and maybe that shows that some of the Government policy has helped in some ways we've gone through the pandemic. Okay, then we tried to have a look at the percentage of people that are more likely to look for roles and what the employment market could look like going forward. So 43% is a high number. However, if we think back and say there were a percentage of people that didn't feel like they were treated very well, they're probably going to be looking for work. There's already 14.5% made redundant. They're definitely going to be looking for work, and they might not have thought they were. Of that 14.5% that are furloughed, some of those will be worried that their jobs won't be secure, so they're going to be looking for work. And then there's 36% of people saying that they think their businesses may not perform as well moving forward. So there's a likelihood that a number of those will take things into their own hand. So therefore, 43% more likely to look for work might sound high, but when you look at all of the circumstances around it, I don't necessarily think that that's an unrealistic number. At the bottom there, some people will be scared to look for work. That could be because they've been treated so well. It could be because their businesses have improved over that time and are looking very strong. Or it might just be that they feel like they actually have a secure job, so why mess around with it? But again, over the next few months, we'll see what happens. If those people are leaving permanent jobs and going into other permanent jobs, that will keep the recruitment market moving over the next few months. Okay, in our salary survey back in October 2019, we added a section in to see what benefits people felt had more worth to them than others, what would actually attract them to a business, tried to look a bit deeper at it. We thought we'd just see if the pandemic has changed what benefits people value more. And actually at 29%, that's quite a high figure. So it's something that businesses might want to look at both in terms of retention of the staff they've got, and also when they're recruiting, to give themselves a competitive edge over other people that will be recruiting. If we look at the next slide, it will give you an idea of which benefits are most highly ranked. Flexible working always was, but that's even more so. Pension, bonus schemes are definitely always things that were appealing anyway. The biggest movements in there have been things like parking, where I guess people are perhaps scared of public transport at the moment, so parking could become a benefit that holds high worth to somebody. Healthcare, obviously we've seen an awful lot of people unfortunately unwell, and so healthcare has probably become a more highlighted benefit to people. Gym and leisure packages, people are more health conscious again, so those things I think are definitely things that people will value more. Things like cinema discounts, shopping vouchers, we have perk box. Do you know what? People like them. They're valued to some extent, but they're not the biggest valued one. So it's worth looking at how much you're spending on things like that, and whether that money could be refocused into other areas which might appeal more to your staff. But you know, it wouldn't hurt to put a survey out for businesses to see what people actually want, and try and actually mould their benefits more to the people that get them. Okay, outside of the pandemic, we've also seen with things going on in America originally, and then in the UK, Black Lives Matters has obviously grown massively over the past couple of months and become a very big issue, which people are looking at. We held a diversity and inclusion seminar back in February 2019, which was very well attended. So if any of you were on that, it was, you know, thanks for turning up again. What came out of that is that obviously diversity and inclusion was always becoming a bigger subject anyway, but we thought it'd be interesting to see that when people are moving jobs, how high a value did they hold on it? So at 7.4 out of 10, they want to see a diverse workforce, and that would draw them to a business. I might have thought it might have been a little bit higher, but it's still a high number. So the only conclusion I could take is that organisations that can demonstrate a diverse culture will definitely have an advantage in securing the best talent against those that don't have a diverse culture. So bear it in mind, keep focusing on it. Don't let things like that drop because of other issues surrounding the pandemic, because they're still very important. Okay, so conclusions. Apologies, we seem to have left the screen blank. I think the biggest things I would say are that people are undoubtedly going to want a bigger amount of time at home than they were before, and it's going to be interesting to see how business can adapt to that as we move forwards. I found that interesting on the basis that people, as we said earlier, were actually saying that they found it harder to work from home. So the other conclusion we're taking is obviously that people are looking at things and saying, well, actually, we won't have the same peripheral issues as we had throughout the pandemic. Other conclusions that we took away from this are the benefits. What people want is changing, so try and understand what people actually want moving forwards. I think we can make an assumption that there could be some real difficulties for the owners of commercial property moving forwards, as there may be less and less need for it from business. People may downsize, they might look for more flexible solutions. So I think that sector is one that's going to have to think about how they are working with local businesses in order to make sure that they get through it unscathed. And then finally, that diversity is still important. Don't lose it. It will make a difference as we move forwards. Outside of the conclusions of this, I think the other thing that I'm thinking about in a very big way at the moment is, as we go back into that second wave, if it is a second wave, how's that going to further impact things? I think what Rishi did yesterday will hopefully help businesses, although it's obviously there is less financial assistance there than potentially there was with the furlough scheme. The more jobs that can be saved at the moment, the better, so that when we move through and out the other side, hopefully we can go back into a buoyant economic market as quickly as possible. So thank you very much for coming along. Just some contact details. If you've got any general inquiries, there's the admin@Wade McDonald email address. Switchboard is there. You can click on that link if this video allows you to see the consultants and try and find the one that's most specialist to the market that you're in, or simply call me on my mobile, 07850 441 347. That's 07850 441 347. And we look forward to speaking to you all very soon. Thanks a lot.